All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Binghamton Trinity Professional Development Series. I am Dr. David Sterling Brown. I'm Associate Professor of English at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'm very excited for the session that we have for you today, Transforming Where You Are. And I want to start, of course, by thanking the Binghamton team once again for the opportunity to collaborate on this initiative. And so I'd like to thank the interim dean of the graduate school, Gretchen Mahler, as well as Associate Dean Andreas Pape, Yungabi and Go, the Assistant Director of Grad School Operations, and of course, Nicole Smith, the Administrative Assistant that we've been working with. As I said, I am Dr. David Sterling Brown, and today I'm very excited because I'm going to be co-presenting with Dr. Melissa Jenkins of Wake Forest University. Hello, Melissa. As part of this conversation, we're actually going to introduce ourselves pretty extensively. So I'm not going to take the liberty of introducing Melissa beyond what I've just said, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Jenkins so she can tell you all about who she is and where she's from.
Okay, excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with David Sterling Brown. I've known him for quite a long time. I'm amazed to see how he's become such a trailblazer and pioneer in his field in such a short amount of time. And I wanted to say really quickly, congratulations to him for promotion to associate professor. That space for academic freedom, but with academic freedom comes great responsibility. So that'll be part of what we talk about today. So what we wanted to put together for you all is an opportunity to think about short-term planning, the day-to-day of what's happening where you are, and the small changes, incremental changes that you can make. There's going to be a lot of aspects to the conversation that we're going to have today. I'm going to share my screen and let you see the slides. Let's see. So can everybody see those slides? Just maybe say, okay, perfect. So we have a lot of goals and topics. One of the things I'm sure you've experienced in your work as a graduate student or as an assistant professor or associate professor, wherever you find yourself, is that there are going to be these official designations for how much time you should spend doing research, doing your teaching, doing service, community engagement, and then you have to find a place for your own life story somewhere in there as well. So we want to talk about how to strike some of that balance for yourself. We want to talk about activism and what that can look like at all stages of a career, and maybe a few cautionary tales, but also a lot of cheerleading for you related to that. What it means to find a mentor and what it means to be a mentor, what it means to express gratitude and make a plan to make change. So one of the things that we're hoping to be able to do is have an interactive element to this conversation. So you're going to see some QR codes on the slides, and you should be able to use those to offer some feedback. But we're also going to put those same links in the chat as we go forward to make sure that if the QR code doesn't work for you, that the link should work for you. So yes, we're going to talk about our journeys from graduate school to where we are now with the stops in between. And then we're going to do the gratitude exercise, the transformation exercise. And we want you to walk away with some concrete goals and some concrete takeaways. So we have an opportunity for you to do that as well. So first, I'm going to introduce myself briefly, and then I'm going to turn things over to David Sterling Brown, who's going to do the same. So if you want to follow me on academia.edu or connect with me so that we can talk in the future, this QR code should take you to my academia.edu page, but you can also just Google me. So the major thing I wanted to say about my journey, the magic of ignoring the phrase, that's a distraction. You're going to hear from your dissertation advisors, you're going to hear from your thesis advisors. When you're looking to do something that seems a little bit off the beaten track in terms of direct connection to your research agenda. But what I've found is that a lot of those so-called distractions have been some of the most profound experiences that I've had. So I just want to start by saying a little bit about my graduate education. I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out how I was going to buy lunch. So what I found myself doing often is going to the psychology department and signing up for the different research studies that had me playing computer games or sorting resumes, things like that related to people's research. And I didn't realize the extent to which I was becoming a part of people's research on implicit bias and race and racism as I participated in those studies. So I would take my $10, my $15, go buy lunch. But in the back of my mind, I said, these studies are really interesting. And I started appreciating the way that psychologists conduct studies and the way psychologists put together research. And some of those interactions became a part of my current book project. I start my book on habits of sympathy with myself as a graduate student performing in those studies and thinking about the implications. I was a resident advisor. My faculty mentors sometimes said, that's a distraction. Why are you spending time helping students put on plays, being the race relations tutor for a bunch of undergraduates, sitting in the hospital with students at 3 a.m? And looking back, I realized that that was a great education in itself. I was ready for the job market because I had so many meals with people I didn't know as a resident tutor. I was ready for the job market because I was able to talk about my own work with people from lots of different fields and people from all walks of life at the institution. And when I came to my current institution as an assistant professor, I had concrete ideas about how I wanted to engage in service based on what I enjoyed and what I didn't enjoy as a graduate student. So carving out that time to learn a little bit about yourself and your own service profile and what you enjoy, it's not really a waste of time. It's not really a distraction. It can help to orient you and also reinvigorate your research in some ways. Currently, I'm an advisor for a student group that's interested in helping animals. That became a course for me, and I teach a course. Students go to the animal shelter. I have children and my advisors said, that's not really what you want to do when you're trying to get a PhD or when you're on the tenure track. And I felt that when they were young, and I found myself reading to them all these really interesting books. And I said, I want to learn more about these books. And now I'm a children's literature scholar in addition to being a Victorianist. So I think sometimes those opportunities to take a break from the primary research agenda, it can be more than just service. It can be an opportunity to reflect, to find a secondary interest, to realize your own humanity when others might be trying to take a little bit of that away from you. So that's my major takeaway. And the other thing I would say is that it helps you to continue to evolve as a scholar. If you find yourself just getting weary with a project, talking to a colleague in a different field, or picking up a new extracurricular or meditation practice can be exactly what you need to refresh and reorient. So your turn, David.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Again, I'm Dr. David Sterling Brown, and you can learn about me through my website that I created, which is just davidsterlingbrown.com. And there's plenty of information there about the kind of work that I do, but also in thinking about what Melissa has just said, there's a lot there that shows how I have seemingly taken tangents in my work, but also made those tangents work together and create synergy and make them work for me. And so the other thing I'll say, and I'll get to that too, is my book is forthcoming with Cambridge University Press. And that's something too that has actually benefited from this sort of amalgamation of things that I have involved myself with. And so before I even get into graduate school and just thinking about that part of my trajectory, I also wanted to mention to you all that prior to graduate school, I actually worked for an education nonprofit, Teach for America. And that's something that sort of helped me find my way to graduate school, actually. And so if you have, and I know at least there's a couple people on this call right now who have work experience that they did before graduate school, I would just encourage you not to discount that from your current path, because I found that the work that I did at Teach for America, which is essentially an organization that is about creating educational equity for folks who are growing up in low-income areas and giving them access to education and hopefully access to quality teachers. But I was a recruiter for Teach for America, so I didn't actually teach. And being on the recruitment team allowed me to develop a skill set that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I think even that work partly helped me put this series together when I think about it, because I started out as a recruitment associate. So I was basically the assistant to a recruitment director. And when I think about essentially what it meant to be an assistant, I was managing this person's schedule. I was setting up meetings for them. I was creating events for them. I was marketing the events. And so I really had to develop a lot of skills that I didn't actually get to develop in undergrad, which was kind of nice. And then I was promoted to recruitment director. And so I became the person who I was working for, essentially. And as a recruitment director, I had to travel a lot. I had to network with people on college campuses. So I was the Connecticut recruitment director. And so traveling around the state, talking with folks from undergraduate students to college and university presidents, again, just developed a lot of different skills, which we do need in graduate school and beyond, to think about how can we talk to different people and how can we get people to sort of buy into our goals. And so that was something that was really beneficial work for me. And so when I immediately decided I like being on college campuses, but not necessarily in this role, that's when I decided to go to graduate school. But I thought that my Teach for America experience was not at all going to be relevant to what I do now and what I was doing in graduate school, but I couldn't have been more wrong. And so I'd just like to say that, again, if you have skills or if you've had work that you've done, and even if you're doing sort of odd jobs during graduate school to kind of make your way through, just know, because I actually did have to work when I was in graduate school as well. I was a assistant at the Fales Library in New York University's library, which is a special collections library. Again, didn't think that skill was going to be useful at all, but couldn't have been more wrong. But so graduate school was an opportunity, though, for me to sort of get my feet wet in the field and really start to think about what mattered to me. And I actually had an interest in African-American literature and also early modern English literature. Again, two things that seemed incredibly separate from each other. But when I think about it now, those disparate interests completely define my entire profile right now in terms of thinking about what I do as far as research is concerned, the types of work that I've written, but also how I've incorporated African-American literature into my early modern English studies work. And so I would just say, and actually speaking of, what Melissa was talking about in terms of sort of being steered away from things that interest you from advisors or other people, I got a lot of flack from people who didn't necessarily think that my work was going to make sense. And as a lot of people in this series have said, those are the moments when you kind of can tell you're on a right track. And it's hard to trust that. But if you do, you'll find that you might actually be onto something that can be really interesting. And so from graduate school, I started out at the University of Arizona as an assistant professor of English there, and I was there for 3 years. And I took on service opportunities there, as well as opportunities to just kind of do things that were of interest to me. So I planned, for instance, along with 2 colleagues, a statewide undergraduate conference. There's so much focus on graduate students and PhD training, especially at Research One institutions, but I'm also someone who cares a lot about pedagogy and teaching. And so we put together this statewide conference and brought together about 14 institutions in the state of Arizona. And so again, when I think about all of the planning work that I had to do at Teach for America, those skills were being developed way back before I started graduate school. And it was just a really nice opportunity to see that, okay, I know how to do these like logistical things, because it's a lot of moving parts when you're trying to put together a conference with a bunch of different institutions and work with people, and especially involve undergraduates. And that type of planning work has also come to define what I value about being a scholar now and also being a professor, because I want to work across institutions. I want to work with different people, but it's really important to know how you're able to establish those kinds of connections once you are actually sort of got these ideas percolating. Beyond Arizona, I also have worked at the Binghamton University in the SUNY system, of course, and so that's one of our partners for this, in addition to ACLS and the Mellon Foundation. And at Binghamton, again, I just built on the kinds of things that I had done at the University of Arizona. And this series really actually, I would say, started at Binghamton even before it started this year. I received from the dean at the time, Elizabeth Schulten, a small micro grant to help start a sort of mentoring program at Binghamton. And so I did that for the first semester that the award was presented to us. And it was an opportunity for me to help graduate students think about how to make their experiences better. And by doing that, we had conversations that had nothing to do with really graduate school and graduate school work. It was thinking about mental health. It was thinking about imposter syndrome, some of the topics that have actually made their way into this series. And so I like to mention that because at the time, I didn't have the project sort of at the scale that I would have liked it to be, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't actually doing work, both for the folks who were involved with it then, but also for me, because when I think about it now, this series, again, is building on that idea that I had from years ago. And then moving on, I'm now at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'm starting to see, even as I'm talking to you all, the synergy that's been developed among those different both institutional posts that I've had, but also the opportunities that I've had to collaborate with people, because I was able to reach back and now collaborate with Dean Andreas Pape and the Binghamton Graduate School to make this opportunity available to you all. And so at various moments, like Melissa, though, I have had people ask, why are you doing this? And my short answer to that is because I have to do things that nourish my intellectual, but also personal interests. And I think that as an academic, I see myself as a person first. And so I don't really care if, something that I'm doing isn't directly related to Shakespeare, for instance, because I know that, as Melissa has seen in her own career, right? Like she's now, children's literature is something that she's very passionate about. And that came from just doing things that she was interested in doing. So never discount why something is important to you, especially if you think it is going to be of value to what you're doing now or later. And so the question, just to wrap up, that I would say I've been asking myself, and I would encourage folks to ask themselves, is who are you when you think about the work that you're doing, and why does what you're doing matter to you? Because as Noir Al-Sadir talked to us about in one of the previous sessions, when you're really interested in something, when it doesn't feel like work, because it kind of comes from a place of passion and it comes from inside of you. And so last thing I'll say is the book, my book, Shakespeare's White Others, that came from in here, definitely. And even as I've been dealing with proofs and the production process, I'm like, why is this so hard? And why is this so challenging? Because it's very personal. The work that we do as academics may not seem that way, but so many people, especially a lot of my mentors, are very quick to talk about how the work is indeed personal. And when it has that personal connection to who you are, it is so much easier to actually get the work done because of that passion is there. So I'll leave it at that.
That's excellent. I put stop share for just a moment because now it's time to get a little bit more interactive with you all. And I'm going to put a few links in the chat, and these links should get us all the way through the rest of our time together. The first link is to a Jamboard that's going to give you the opportunity to do some reflection related to gratitude and also some reflection related to what you would like to see changed at your institution. So this Jamboard has 2 pages. And then at the end, we're going to give ourselves some time for reflection through this plan and pledge, where you're thinking about what you appreciate and how you can show that appreciation, what you would like to see changed, and some micro steps that you can make to get to that change, and then what your accountability structure is going to be for that. All right, so first, I'm going to share the screen again and get us back to the slideshow. So the Jamboard can also be accessed through this link here on the slide if you cannot get there through the links that I just put in the chat. But the first questions that we're asking you to think about on this Jamboard: what would you like to see changed most urgently for people in your position? Oh, I'm sorry, that's page 2. I'm sorry. Page 1 is gratitude. What do you appreciate most about where you find yourself, and who do you appreciate most and why? And I see a lot of you on the Jamboard, and so that's very exciting. If you have not used one of these before, the way that you can add a comment is on the left-hand side. You should see the sticky note option. And so if you just click that, you can type your thoughts in response to that question. So for example, what I'm thinking about and what I'd like to talk about certainly is mentoring, formal and informal. And certainly I would want to say that I have a lot of appreciation for people like David Sterling Brown, who do the work to bring people together and talk about these kinds of things. So that's the first sticky note that we see. Feel free to add to it as you see fit. If for whatever reason the links do not work for you, you can also use the Q&A function to offer some comments on this page. So while you're thinking and writing, David and I can do a little bit of talking about how we would answer that question. And the first thing I would say is that I did put some readings on this slide that I am very appreciative of as I think about my answers to these kinds of questions. Oliver Sacks has a work called Gratitude. It's just 4 short essays that he wrote as he realized he had this terminal illness. And as with other texts written by people who realize that their life is coming to an end, there's something about watching another scholar or another thinker grapple with their own mortality that leads us to take a step back and maybe be able to put things in perspective. The Baylor text, The Gratitude and Intellectual History, and the Griffith text, Gratitude, A Way of Teaching, would be in some ways a more spiritual way to approach the concept of gratitude, and also thinking about the role that gratitude can play in our pedagogy. And then finally, I love this book, Black Women's Yoga History by Stephanie Evans. It's about meditation practices, and it's about expressing appreciation for all of the history of yoga and other kinds of practices that have certainly been appropriated, appreciated by many, many different cultures. But in a lot of cases, some of these practices originated with specific women and men who are trying to process different kinds of traumas. And I really appreciate this history and this how-to guide for how to take that moment and breathe and relax and express gratitude. And then the last thing I'll say before David speaks and we turn to some of your great responses on this Jamboard is that you can buy a gratitude journal. That's a new thing now. You can go on Amazon. There are so many that you can purchase, but there are also apps for this. There's always an app for everything. But what all of these things say together is putting into your day-to-day practice somehow the opportunity to step back, reflect, and say, I appreciate you, and I appreciate this opportunity or this aspect of where I am. So what would you like to add, David?
So I'm like, I love this Jamboard thing. I'm the person who put free time naps and opportunities to relax and unplug. That's just one of mine. But as far as what I appreciate, so first, of course, I have to say that I am so grateful for people in my life like Melissa Jenkins, who, she mentioned, we've known each other for quite some time. And it's really nice when you just have genuine people who are sort of in your corner or in your orbit. And so that's something I would say. I also appreciate, and I'm learning to appreciate this more about myself, because it's not something that I thought would matter to academia, but I consider myself to be somebody who's creative. And I've found that the more I sort of release the valve on my creativity, the more I'm enjoying the kind of work that I do. I would also have to say that I'm incredibly grateful for people who take the time to teach me. And beyond folks like Melissa, I'm also thinking about my students, and I'm thinking about just random interactions that I have with people who are not in academia. I think it's so important to, and so I would say that too, that I appreciate sort of the constellation of folks who are in my world from left to right and top to bottom, because everybody has something to offer, regardless of where they are in relationship to where you are. And I found that to be an invaluable, I don't know, sort of mindset to embrace as I have thought about my work, as I've thought about my personal life. And so, yeah, I'd say those are the things that I'm appreciating at the current moment.
That's great. This might be a little bit of a spoiler, but did you want to say something about putting together the acknowledgements page for your book and what that process was like for you?
Yes, sure. That's a great question, because I struggled with the acknowledgements page for my book. Melissa has seen a draft of it, so she knows what it entails. But as I was putting the acknowledgements page together, I guess I should back up. I'm always trying to be, whatever it is that I'm doing, whether it's how I teach, how I write, I'm always trying to be aware of how people have done things before me, but also how I might be able to do it differently in a way that is sort of true to who I am. And so with my acknowledgements page, I basically started from the beginning. And the folks who helped me from the start, so I'm thinking about all the way back to like elementary school teachers, as well as people in my community who started organizations. I grew up in a low-income community in South Norwalk, Connecticut, which is actually where I am right now. And I couldn't forget that there were people who started educational initiatives that were free for kids in my community to go to, that helped us learn about the kinds of history that we don't get taught in school, helped us do creative things like that. That was where I learned about Kwanzaa, for instance. Had no idea about the holiday Kwanzaa until I was a part of this program called the Class Project. And so just thinking about people who were nurturing me from very early age up until this moment, that's the sort of range that you see in my acknowledgements, as well as the institutions. And I mean all institutions, not just institutions that gave me money, but institutions that gave me opportunities to speak, to, again, exercise my creativity. All of that stuff is in there because I think it is really important to remember that we don't get where we are by ourselves or alone, but also to reflect. So remember and reflect on, how did this opportunity, or how did this connection or this relationship that I was able to develop have an impact on this book? Because I'll tell you just one last quick story. Like, I reached out to a journal that I worked with, and there's someone in their institution that I wanted to thank. I didn't know her last name, so that's why I had to contact them about it. But it was just important for me to put that person in the book and in the acknowledgement as well, because again, I always think about the constellation and the synergy. And along my journey of trying to put the book together, this person was important to me. And that's why I felt I needed to put them in there.
That's wonderful to hear. And I've tears welled up in my eyes looking at some of y'all's answers. And I'm sure you can see some of the responses that you've given to that question. And they're very varied. And they're about institutions, but they're also about people and different initiatives to get people together. So I really very much appreciate these answers, and you'll have some time at the end of our time together to decide what you want to do about it. Yes, I appreciate access to resources. Now, how am I going to express that appreciation? So thank y'all very much for these answers. Now, I'd love you to slide over to page 2, the next frame of the Jamboard. And here the question is, what would you like to see changed most urgently for people in your position at your institution? Who would you like to see have a seat at the table that doesn't currently have one? And again, no need to go into too many specifics unless you want to, but this is the opportunity to take that positive energy related to gratitude and then also think about how we can pay it forward. So as you reflect and as you think about how you might like to answer that question, and the way to get to page 2, on the top of what you see, you should see a little arrow, and that should get you to the second page of the Jamboard. Okay, and I see an answer already, more emphasis on anti-racist training and initiatives. That's a wonderful, wonderful idea. We'll just say a little bit about some readings and just say a little bit about what we're thinking, and then we'll have a chance to come back and notice some of the things that you've put on the Jamboard related to this question. So David recommended In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower to me, and I had not read it until he recommended it. And it's amazing thinking about universities and thinking about med ed and the way in which universities have a responsibility to engage with the community, not exploit the community, but to give something back. And he had a lot of concrete examples in there of specific institutions that are getting it right and institutions that aren't quite there yet. And so I appreciated that. The End of the English Major is a kind of viral New Yorker article that I think is relevant to my field and to David's. And it's part of the constant conversations about the role of the humanities in higher education and how we can make sure that that role continues to be as important as it has been historically. And there are a lot of wonderful books, The Problem with Rules, Essays on the Meaning of a Liberal Education. And I find myself in my professional development classes often recommending Doris Sommer's The Work of Art in the World as another opportunity to think about, these are the things we make in our classrooms. These are the things that we do in our studios, but how can we take that and translate it into larger spaces or other spaces? So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think I'm going to put something related to on-campus childcare, for example, on my Jamboard answer. But as David talks to this question, I'm going to just show you a few headlines from the last couple of weeks inside higher education, the Chronicle, that give you a sense of some of the major movements and upswells of interest and advocacy and activism that we see among undergraduate students, graduate students, and faculty all over the United States. And I don't know about you, but for me, inside higher ed and the Chronicle, I don't just go to them for the job listings. I love getting a sense of what's happening at other institutions. One, it sometimes helps me appreciate where I am, but then also it can spark ideas for the kinds of changes that could happen with help and with collaboration. So I'll turn it over to David to talk about this question as I show you some headlines from the last couple of weeks. And you're muted, David, sorry.
And to say there's always room, for improvement. Like, I think back to my experience at Teach for America, and we'd have these structured problem solving calls every Friday, right? Where we're thinking about what are we doing well, and what needs improvement. And so we'd have a sort of 2 split columns on a sheet, and we call it pluses and deltas instead of positives and negatives, but pluses and deltas. And so when I think about what needs to be improved, so I'm of course the person who wants more emphasis on anti-racist both training, but also just initiatives, because I do think there's a big difference between, for instance, this DEI focus, which doesn't necessarily have to explicitly involve anti-racist agendas. And so I'd love to see that happen more and be stated plainly, because we come up with all these different terms and acronyms, when if we just crystallize it into one, I think sometimes that could be better. I'd also like to, and I think my institution is doing a pretty darn good job. So just to back up, I'm actually a Trinity alum, and so I have a 20, and Melissa is actually an alum of Wake Forest, so we have that in common. But I have a 21-year history with Trinity, and I can say that since 2002, when I started there, there has definitely been strides to change the landscape in terms of who is represented on campus among students and also faculty, because, you know, it sends a particular kind of message, and this is sort of what the shape and makeup of the college was like when I started, but it sends a particular message when the majority of people of color who you encounter are people who are in the positions of service and servitude, right? So I'm thinking about the cafeteria workers or the people who are cleaning campuses. And so now we can start to see more people in a sort of a range of positions. And I think that matters because, as we always say, representation matters. I also love to think about, and I saw this, and I'm just going to amplify what somebody put in the Jamboard, but thinking again also about, you know, fair compensation and things of that nature. Again, within academia, there is a range depending on the type of institution you're at, depending on even which region of the country you're in. And so these are all things that I think, you know, there's room for improvement, but you also have to think, and speaking of our sort of speaker who's coming on Friday, Stuart Crabb, you know, he mentioned a very important statement to me that I like to just keep reiterating: all money is not green. And so when you think about other opportunities that you have for compensation, I think it's important to keep in mind that not everything comes in the form of a dollar bill, for instance. And the last thing I would say is just networking opportunities. I would love to see more of that. You know, I'm not even talking about my specific institution, but I have actually you know, met people who are at the same institution that I know them, but they don't know each other. And sometimes I think, oh, that's so strange. And so I think more opportunities for people to network and be able to come together and realize that we are on these campuses, but then also in the broader landscape, communities of learners, of thinkers, of scholars. And so I think if we can just continue to build community sort of networking and strength, that would be great too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, David. And yeah, I love these answers that I'm seeing on the Jamboard here. All sorts of things related to how we are compensated and how our colleagues are being compensated, what counts as scholarship, what it means to value diverse perspectives, staffing, hiring, recruitment, retention, diversity, acknowledgement that we're people within our institutions. These are really, really fantastic goals. They're the kinds of things that we can't get done at our institutions alone. It would be wonderful to find ways to get some of this done across institutions. But again, our focus today is thinking about the small steps that we can all take now to make some of these things happen. So thank you very much for these perspectives, and we'll continue to reflect upon them and think about them. But I have some questions for all of us to get a little bit of a discussion going here about what it means to be an activist, what it means, and what are some of the outlets for getting some of that work done. And it'll be nice to see where David and I, you know, I'm the old fogey in this conversation, been at my institution since 2008, how we might answer some of these questions differently. And so the first one I had, and you can get us started, David, is thinking about the role of social media and media in particular as you're strategizing to get people excited about a specific initiative.
Yeah, and this is so social media is something that I have gone back and forth with, and a lot in part thanks to just information that, for instance, Melissa has shared with me about just what's going on in the world with respect to how people are responding to academics, and also the kinds of tensions that can develop from being involved in social media. And so my own take on it now, it's evolved from where it was. I didn't join Twitter until 2019. And I wasn't really using social media professionally prior to that. And I joined because I thought it would be a great way to, well, one, I was told, and I don't know how true this is, I'd be curious to hear what you think, Melissa, but I was told that as, a junior scholar and as somebody who is going to be having a book coming out, like, this is something that publishers care about, and, they want to see that you have a sort of online presence and all of that. And at the time, that was a motivating factor. At the moment, I actually don't care about that as much. And so a lot of my tweets now, if you go through my Twitter history, there's been a shift. It was very much about Shakespeare and focusing on race and stuff. And I tweet that stuff sometimes, but I also realized that for my own sort of personal mental status, that stuff stresses me out. And so you have to be aware of what works for you. And I know that it may seem like I'm on Twitter a lot, but I'm just retweeting positive things most of the time that other people have said, because I like what kind of energy that puts into me and my mindset. But I don't spend a lot of time trying to make like arguments about issues, or even if it's things related to my field, because I think everything that I have to say is on my website. Everything that I have to say about Shakespeare, that I have to say about race, and if it hasn't been put on my website right now or yet, it's because I'm thinking about it, but it'll be published somewhere. Because I think when we consider what actually matters as an academic, for instance, in terms of moving up the chain, in terms of tenure and promotion and all of that stuff, as one of my mentors has said to me, tweets are not going to get you tenure, but they can make you lose your job. And so those are things that are really important to think about. But I don't know, what do you think, Melissa?
I think the one thing I would add there is just being aware of your institution's policies. And some institutions have not kept up with the technology, with the different strategies for activism and advocacy. So, for instance, if you're a faculty member, have you taken a look at the most recent version of your faculty handbook and what the handbook has to say about protesting, about First Amendment rights, about speaking out about how you represent the university on Facebook or Twitter or the other platforms, what they have to say about you becoming an advisor or collaborating with businesses, and what kinds of conflict of interest policies might be in place at your institution. Same deal for the student handbook for undergraduate students or graduate students. And I'm not saying check the handbook to do what it says. I'm saying check the handbook to find out some things about what your institution values. And the handbook can be your guide and resource and supporter. If there is a conflict, you're able to point, say, no, this is what you said about free speech. This is what you said about social media usage as my own person, as contrasted to presenting myself as a graduate student or as a faculty member at this institution. So being aware of the policies, and where there doesn't happen to be a clear policy, pushing with the administration to say, I want to know what the university's stance is on this, because it's important to me and it's important to my colleagues. So get on it, make that document and make it public. And you'll find in a lot of cases that your administration will do that work of like, let's put together that conflict of interest policy. Let's put together that speech policy. Let's put together that protest policy. And then that becomes a site of negotiation between the administration and faculty or students.
Yeah, and can I add one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just thought of this as you were talking. So I think it's good to be aware of like, what are the expectations of you, but then also what are your expectations for yourself? Because when I initially started the whole, my Twitter account, I was really trying to sort of fit into what I thought mattered in my field in terms of how people are representing themselves, but I also felt out of alignment with myself. And so you want to make sure that you are in alignment with yourself, because I'd often tweet something and then have anxiety about it. And that's not a space I can live in. So just know that you really need to, and it's totally okay if you are taking the road less traveled.
Yep. And the one thing I would add, and this is, again, David's such a great example of this, taking charge of your media presence, taking charge of your profile, because if you don't do it, it will be done for you. I had to just kind of, I'm not on Twitter. I don't think I'm on Twitter, but there has been a tweet with my face on it and a quote from me, but it was not created by me. It was created by my institution to advocate for something, right? So wherever you are, folks are going to be excited about using you, and not in necessarily a negative sense, but just having you out there as someone who can speak to the institution. So you can let that happen to you. You can open a brochure and see your face and say, wait a second, why am I suddenly the spokesperson for X, Y, and Z? Or you can just put it all in one place, which is what David has done. Go to my website and you'll see what I'm up to. Go to my website, you'll see my projects, my collaborations. And I'm sure you've heard this from your professional development advisors. Google yourself and see what pops up and decide how satisfied you are with what pops up. Mm-hmm. Do we want to say anything about faculty-student collaboration when it comes to activism? Something that I've noticed, especially as relates to underrepresented faculty members, is that you find yourself as a part of a lot of the student questions and a lot of the student anxieties related to specific issues. And you find yourself having to be an advisor, but also a spokesperson as students try to get together to decide what they want to do about a specific issue. So do we have any advice about that experience? What do you think, David?
I would say, again, for me, I choose to do what is in alignment with, because I care a lot about certain issues, but I also think about how is this going to affect, again, just anxiety or stress. Like those are sort of the markers for me in terms of how I want to get involved, or are there ways I could do this particular thing and I might want to support that aren't going to, make me the face of it or make me have to invest more time in it than I can afford to at the moment. Because again, just to sort of back up to something that I said at the beginning, we are not our jobs, right? We're people first. And so I always want to make sure that the human side of me is being nourished and cared for. And if that means doing nothing and taking naps, because one of my mentors, the late David Bevington, actually said, that was one of his keys to success, actually, was lots of naps. And as I told Melissa, I take lots of naps. So you have to, again, I think it's just a matter of doing a sort of a cost benefit analysis, if you will, and making calculations. To quote Simon Wu, who presented in this series earlier, he makes calculations about how things are going to fit into his life and his goals, and always keep your goals in mind, I think, is really important as you're thinking about being involved with faculty-student collaboration, for instance.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Have one additional reading before we turn to our last reflective activity, and then also any questions that you might have for us. This was last week, again, this wonderful essay, Lessons for Becoming a Public Scholar from Inside Higher Ed. And I thought that had a lot of really helpful and interesting nuggets that add to some of the things we've talked about already. Finding a public audience for scholarship, finding ways to write to the public and also to write to people in your field. And again, David is going to have a lot to say about that, the different venues where he's published his thoughts. Becoming a public scholar also involves course design. When you decide what you want to assign to your students, where you have the power to make those decisions, what kinds of things do you want them to make? Do you want them to make things for you to read, or do you want them to make things for the public to read? And a lot of us have experienced or had a lot of really wonderful opportunities to see our students get out there and be on the radio or present their work in a public blog or create something that, again, really helps them to see the connection between what they're studying and what they're going to be doing after they graduate. He talks too about advisory roles when you find yourself on, so for example, I'm on the North Carolina Textbook Commission because I care about it, and we get together and we talk about what our textbooks look like from K through 12, and how we can make sure that all the perspectives are being recognized within what our students are learning. So again, some of those advisory positions, people might say, oh, this is taking time away from your graduate study, or this is taking time away from your work as an assistant professor or a teaching professor. But I take another look at it. If it matters to you, that's really what's important. But in addition, you'll find that the things that matter to you in your life end up mattering to you in your research and your scholarship as well. And then he talks again about different strategies for media outreach, like what it looks like to write an op-ed and to get that op-ed published, and why some of that work can be very important. Some universities have pages. You could create a page for yourself describing what your expertise happens to be. And then when someone contacts your university to talk to someone or get someone on the radio to talk about this, they're going to contact you. So getting in touch with your outreach coordinators, your communication, external relations people, and making sure that you are profiled by them in the way that you would like to be profiled so that people can find you. And so I'll just end here with this quote from his essay. And the fact is that such public work never competed, distracted, or detracted from my other scholarly pursuits. Rather, these activities are inseparably interrelated with teaching and scholarship, and were mutually stimulating and enriching. And I say to that, absolutely, that's been my experience as well. So we're going to transition. We're almost to 1 o'clock, believe it or not. We're going to transition to this final activity that's going to be a reflection activity for you, and allow you to make a plan or a pledge for yourself to what you want to do next week, what you want to do next month as relates to showing and expressing your gratitude, but also taking those first incremental steps to being able to leave your institution better than when you arrived there. So I'm going to flip to this last slide just in case you need the QR code. But again, the link to that final opportunity to answer questions is also in the chat. And what we're recommending is that you're going to get a copy of your responses to your email. If you could find that email and then send it to yourself, so that you get it again in a month, and you can remind yourself, oh, this is how I was feeling on May 3rd, 2023, as I thought about my gratitude plan and my action plan in terms of what I want to see changed. And then that would allow you to be accountable to yourself for your plan. So as you're starting to work on this, I did have one more question for David related to this public audiences for our scholarship. And I wonder if you would be willing to say some things about the different venues.
Yeah, so there's one, I didn't know that public scholarship was going to be the direction I'd go in until I realized that I wasn't necessarily talking to who I wanted to be talking to. When I write and when I think, my parents, for instance, and my family are sort of in my mind, and I'm a former first generation college student. And so I want to be able to talk, thinking about audience, to people at all kinds of levels. And so I have published in Public Books, which is a public venue, as well as Los Angeles Review of Books, the Sundial, which is an open access free journal run by the Arizona Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies, as well as I've done work with Claudia Rankin's The Racial Imaginary Institute, which again is a sort of public outward facing institution that is trying to get folks to think about issues that pertain to race primarily. And it's been really great to have those opportunities, because again, I don't want my work just sitting on a library bookshelf where my parents won't ever find it or be able to access it. So again, I'm thinking about them. I'm even thinking at, when my both my grandmothers were alive, I still have one, but them too, right? Like I want everyone who matters to me to be able to engage with what matters to me. And so that's my sort of baseline for when I think about how I can put my voice outside of my field and into other arenas.
That's fantastic. And would you say something as well about teaching tools and how you translate some of your scholarly work into material that students can use, undergraduates and also secondary?
I mean, and I think that quote that you had up, I was like, that's it for me. I actually had a statement like that, and I haven't read this before, so I need to find this article. But it was in my tenure statement. Like, my teaching and research, for instance, are inseparable, and so I find that what I do in the classroom is being fed by what I do in articles or what I did in my book, and vice versa. And I think it's really important to create assignments, for instance, for my students that help me think differently. And so again, when I was talking earlier about, I appreciate being able to learn from people, they're like front and center in my mind, because they don't think of themselves as being able to contribute anything to my educational development, but they actually do. And so I always think it's really important to have assignments and conversations that generate particular kinds of ideas and thoughts that show students that it's reciprocal. Like, that's what I want and I do it through art, I do it through music. There's all kinds of ways to sort of make things engaging in the classroom.
Thank you so much. So I will just say a little bit about these questions that we're asking you on this final reflection. What within your institution you're thankful for, and a small action you can take to express that gratitude. Just one small example at my institution, now that we've transitioned to Canvas, our Center for the Advancement of Teaching has discovered how to put simple little thank you forms on Canvas. And so when I go to Canvas, I see a thank a teacher form and a thank a colleague form. And they've been doing that for the last few semesters. And that's just something at the end of classes to get your teaching evaluations. That could be good or bad, but to also just get random notes from students saying, thanks for that day that you were in your office when I needed to talk to someone, or to get a note from a colleague saying, I really appreciate that you volunteered to speak at that event. And so I think that has created a really interesting culture of gratitude at my institution. And someone just had that little small spark of an idea. Let's use Canvas to offer this to people. The next question that we ask you is a concrete aspect of your institution you like to change. So that's reminding yourself what you put on the Jamboard. And then what might that look like next week? And then what might that look like next month? And who is going to hold me accountable? So I type your answers and then go into your inbox and find your answers and hold yourself accountable for that in the next week or the next month as you make change where you are.
Yeah. And I would just add to, we have our contact information up there for a reason. If you have questions, and it doesn't have to be right away, but if something comes to mind later that you're thinking about as a reflection on this session, please don't hesitate to email either of us. I love answering questions, and of course, just helping people think through these types of matters that can have a really significant impact on what you're doing today, but more importantly, what you're going to be doing tomorrow.
Thank you. And in our last minute, David, did you want to say some things about Friday's event?
So we're going to be joined by Stuart Crabb, who is a talent development specialist and who is super brilliant. And I think I love the sort of structure here, because as Melissa is getting you all to think about next week or tomorrow or a couple weeks from now, Stuart has actually developed a professional development toolkit for everyone. I just had a sneak peek of it yesterday. It is like robust and really brilliantly done, and he's going to actually help you think about like the next 12 months or so of your lives. And so I hope that folks who are tuning in will join us for that. But I'd also just like to thank you for joining us today and for participating and for being a part of this series. And thank you, Melissa, for everything.
Thank you, David. Always great to see you. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions today.
Yeah, thanks. Take care, everyone.